Vriska Circuit is a massive understatement, controversial character originating in the cult multimedia web fiction Homestuck. Much like the work she springs from, Vriska is a figure you either love or love to hate in equal measure, and even the folks who do have affection for the divisive heroine will usually concede that she did some terrible things and/or is a bitch. A few people, perhaps most vocally the wonderful Kate Mitchell, writer of Vriska's PestaQuest route, have however championed a position that is scarcely encountered in earnest unless you know where to look. The insistence that a girl genuinely, literally did nothing wrong whatsoever, morally speaking. And that's the stance I'm going to argue here. Not exactly in the way that Kate, or anyone else for that matter, would. The beliefs expressed in this video are purely my own and so on and so forth. But I had yet to see a similar defense on YouTube, so I figured I'd make one. We'll go through all the crimes Vriska has been charged with in the court of public opinion, vaguely chronologically, and hopefully I can convince you that there's at least a lot more nuance to be had on the matter. Disclaimer though, it is impossible to discuss any of this without massive spoilers for the comic itself, and minor spoilers for its adjacent works, such as the Paradox-based comics and PestaQuest. If you have not read Homestuck and just want to know what the controversy is about, here's your chance to leave if you care about spoilers. I'm sorry I can't help you, but all the media discussed is highly recommended. I'd love to see you again in a few months after catching up, should you still be in the mood for some weapons-grade, unadulterated Vriskos. If you are still here, what's currently on screen are the content warnings for this discussion. I will try to handle each topic with care, but that doesn't change the fact that we will be delving into some truly vile subject matter. You know the work, you know what's coming. Last chance to dip, here we go. A young girl, shrouded in shadow and framed by a spiderweb, grins deviously at her monitor, flashing razor-sharp fangs in the process. She's wearing an eye patch, because of course she is. Heroes aren't introduced this way, the media-savvy reader well knows, and by the time we are told that Vriska habitually feeds children to a monstrous arachnid of a guardian, the villain coding has thoroughly worked its magic. It isn't helped by the fact that we learn this in her introductory page, the place where the hobbies go, the charming idiosyncrasies, not the obligations that make your life a living nightmare. We have, at this point, seen exceptions to the format for Solix and Nepeter, but they were rather more overt and didn't have the misfortune of being quite as evil-looking. Still, villain coding isn't a defense by itself. The character being made to descend the spiral staircase of a gothic castle might well be a genuine monster and deserving of their stylistic treatment. So, was it morally wrong of Vriska to kill those innocents? I promise this isn't a rhetorical question. Was it? Accusation 1. Feeding kids to Spidermom. What's the correct course of action when you are a child and a horrifying spider beast has taken it upon itself to non-stop scream into your mind that it needs to be fed bodies or it will kill you instead? The utilitarian argument that you should just lay down and die because that's the course of action which harms the fewest people does very little to convince me personally. It isn't in any way wrong morally to do that, of course, but would you say that it's unethical not to? Would you demand of a child, or an adult for that matter, to simply accept death due to the circumstances of their birth? Keep in mind that running away isn't an option either due to the mental link, and since trolls without loci get culled. Here's the kicker though, the people Vriska fed to her guardian sort of had it coming. Not in the way Terezi sees it, most likely weren't any more wicked than the average Alternian, but they were playing Flarp, a game, mind you, which is described to us on multiple occasions by separate characters with troll standards for precarity as highly dangerous. Everyone is aware that death is an option. Nepeter doesn't play it because she considers it too risky, and Nepeter hunts Alternian fauna for food on a daily basis. These trolls weren't coerced, there seems to be no broadly malicious incentive structure nudging one to play Flarp. They simply entered a death game of their own accord, knowing the rules and knowing the risks. If there is any group of people you can morally kill if you actually care about staying alive, it would probably be these fucks. And assuming Spidermom could possibly have just kept killing by herself, as she did when Vriska was a Wriggler if push came to shove, her selection of nourishment likely wouldn't have willingly signed up for the high risk of death. I'd personally consider that worse. When I picture evil, I think of someone like Aridin, a literal fascist who opens fire on low-blood settlements from an airship for fun. Not Vriska, someone who wins Colosseum battles against willing participants so she isn't murdered by her guardian. Yeah, sounds a lot less malicious if you put it that way, but then again, a lot of this does circle back to the villain coding, I think. And it's a recurring problem within Homestuck discourse. The comic pulled the same trick in reverse before with Bro Strider, whose blatant abuse of Dave was framed as wacky and charming, so much so that when Dave opens up about it later on, some folks perceived it as a retcon. And similarly, Vriska's later obvious heroics cause a few people actual cognitive dissonance. Aesthetics are effective, and if you aren't paying attention, they probably are being wielded against you. Unlike... I sure wrote that transition, huh? Unlike the Doomsday devices. Accusation 2. Building Doomsday devices. Vriska might not be the smartest character in Homestuck, but she isn't an idiot, and she sure seems hell-bent on staying alive. The idea that she would or could build a functional apocalypse machine and would be willing to give it to an outwardly genocidal, emotionally unstable douche like Aridin and Pora is laughable. Clearly Vriska has never successfully tested the Doomsday devices she builds, since Alternia still firmly exists, for better and for worse. And seeing how the catenative Doomsday Dice Cascader isn't secured against accidental activation at all, does nothing when it is activated, and is supposed to be sent to Aridin, who would want to use it to wipe out all land dwellers, including Vriska herself, it is exceedingly obvious that she doesn't actually believe they work. When Vriska builds cool-looking tech and calls it a Doomsday device, she's LARPing. She's LARPing because her life sucks, because her friends hate her, and because she's all alone in a massive, evil-looking castle, so she might as well roll with the punches. We're talking about a girl who takes every opportunity to cosplay or pretend to be Marquise Spinneret Mindfang, for God's sake. Let her have this. Accusation 3. Lying to Terezi. Another point of contention people have with the whole feeding kids to Yalusa's business is that Vriska roped someone else into helping her with food acquisition against that person's stated moral opposition. While this would be a fair point in the abstract, I think it takes Terezi by her word a bit too much and ignores contextual info. It is made pretty obvious that Terezi knew Vriska wasn't just orchestrating the demise of the wicked. She was against it, sure, but she still played along. She was neither tricked nor controlled, and she could have quit her collaboration at any point, as she eventually did. Those don't seem like the actions of someone who cares a great deal about the lives of innocents, and of course she doesn't. Terezi loves his honourable tyranny, an immense court monster which will often just eat the folks running the trial. Execution seems to her a reasonable punishment for minor slights against the Empire. She has no issue with the death of innocent people. Her problem with Vriska being insufficiently selective in her choice of spider food is that it ruins the LARP. It ruins her vigilante fantasy of being a badass legislator dealing out justice on her own terms. Terezi only quits when her friends get hurt, when Vriska crosses a moral boundary which she actually cares about, and Terezi isn't made complicit in that in any way. All of this is in the text, but you'd be forgiven for coming away from it thinking of Terezi as an off-kilter, though fundamentally morally righteous character, despite her justification for murder being way flimsier than Vriska's if one doesn't fully buy into the idea that any flapper already signed their own death warrant. At this point, we should probably clear up some definitions. When I say did nothing wrong, I don't mean never made a mistake, or always did the best thing imaginable. If you give a peanut bar to someone you don't know has an allergy, you did nothing wrong, you simply did a morally neutral thing which had negative consequences. Similarly, always did the best possible thing is a useless definition because no character or person has ever done that. The definition I'm going with is engaged in no action which isn't copacetic with a conventionally heroic figure. There are other camps which use the statement to mean something else. Often it's wielded hyperbolically as Vriska did some shitty things, but not to the extent people think. Or Vriska did quite a few shitty things, but I like her anyway. Another one, which is common in some circles, and which I think the aforementioned Kate Mitchell uses, is engaged in no action which would make me call the quality of her character into question. That's slightly different because it allows for manipulation. Behavior which is still perceived as bad can be blamed on the influence of Doc Scratch, and that's completely fair. If an adult, much less an ancient borderline omniscient deity, grooms a child into doing something terrible, then the child isn't to blame, the orb creep is. I just think that it's semantically misleading. The child in that scenario still would have done something wrong, they just wouldn't really be to blame. So, if you're wondering why I'm not bringing up manipulation, that's why. It doesn't matter to my argument. I don't think Vriska did anything super terrible, period. And that is absolutely fucking astounding. Between Alternian culture, Spidermom, and the meddling of Doc fucking Scratch, Vriska is an absolute freak of nurture. By all rights, she should be a monster worse than Caliborn at his peak, and it'd be perfectly understandable. But she isn't. She's an absolute bean, an unequivocal hero, and God's favourite princess. But let's get to the bit where people usually play the manipulation card. Accusation 4. Pushing Tavros off a cliff. Yeah, permanently injuring one of your friends because you are frustrated by them is probably not the best of looks, and sort of shitty, admittedly. But here's how Tavros describes Flarp. It's a title under the extreme role-playing genre, and playing it without caution can have serious, real-world consequences. But that's what makes it fun. I had it coming is pretty much stated outright just before the incident, since allowing a mood-swing-prone asshole, who is also a known murderer, to control your surroundings is pretty much the least cautious thing anyone could imaginably do. That's the defense. The following is pure speculation, but I don't think Vriska would have let any serious harm befall Tavros should he have chosen to fight the overpowered enemies. It'd go against her intentions, since from the dialogue it's pretty clear that she sees this as another training exercise to make Tavros less of a wimp and turn him into a summoner-type figure. Tavros wasn't really between a rock and a hard place, though putting someone in such a predicament would of course still be highly morally dubious, if that person hadn't first signed a waiver, like Tavros did. Accusation 5. The Revenge Cycle. Aradia didn't sign the waiver though. Or at least not in the specific instance in which Vriska killed her, but here we have a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense. Aradia sends a ghost army to torment Vriska for the rest of her life, so she puts an end to it. And while Aradia is the aggressor in that situation, I would still say that getting revenge for your friend is a perfectly understandable course of action, even if that friend got hurt due to his own stupidity. Blood feuds don't necessarily require anyone to be in the wrong. Aradia is justified in cursing Vriska, and Vriska is justified in killing Aradia. The same goes for the rest of the vicious revenge cycle. It is now perfectly reasonable for Terezi to believe that Vriska is a threat to her friend group, so she rats her out to Scratch. Keep in mind that Terezi has no idea what Scratch will do. He's a first guardian. For all she knows, he could have killed Vriska instantly. The fact that Vriska only lost an arm and an eye wasn't Terezi holding back. Terezi was fine with whatever would happen, and it happened to be mild. Vriska merely blinding Terezi, on the other hand, was her holding back. She could have done anything, and she chose to go easy on her. Aren't you glad I'm not calling these things intermissions? Consider yourself spared. But also, feel free to skip this one. Obviously feel free to skip all of them. Timestamps in the down there and all that. Anyway, I've read Homestuck 5 times. Once before it concluded, twice after, and then twice more after the epilogues. Over the course of my existence on the web, I have written and read an amount of Homestuck fanfic that my friends consider astonishing, troubling, and frankly indecent. I own a print copy of an original work written by a Homestuck fanfiction author. The Months of Ellen's Haven by Jennifer Giesbrecht, Sephiad Variable, who also wrote most of the Homestuck epilogues. It's good. That's not the point. Back to the point. Vriska Circuit is my third favourite character from this monstrosity of a work, and it really speaks to my attachment to it that I care this deeply about even my number 3 spot. It's probably the only piece of media from which I could confidently describe 12 characters as favourites, as actual favourites. But none of them went through quite as much development as Vriska. I didn't like her on my first read. I know there must have been something truly amiss with that twisted little thing I called a soul back in those days. Only later did I come to appreciate her as a problematic fave, and finally, later still, come to see that she wasn't all that problematic, compared to other characters from the roster whom the fandom considers to be unambiguous good guys. Maybe the fact that I changed my mind is important context to you. Maybe it isn't. What I do think is quite crucial to mention is that one should have no issue admitting the sins of fictional characters one has grown attached to. It's an important thing to keep in mind, lest one succumbs to apologia. I love Catra Sheer and the Princess of Power, but she did hella things wrong. I love Daisy the Magnus Archives, but she did hella things wrong. Abrasive Pharaoh Lady is pretty much my favorite archetype in media, period, but the morality of a character should be thoroughly separated from whether we hold affection for them. Rose-tinted glasses. You get it? Tread carefully. If you're looking for an excuse to not feel bad about liking Vriska despite opposing her actions, please reconsider. Don't let your morals be muddied over something so trivial, when you can just go, she did some terrible things, but I like her anyway. I disagree, but ethical frameworks are different, and I don't so much seek to convince as to offer a perspective. Do with it what you will. Accusation 6. Bullying Tavros. Vriska Circuit is not that smart and not particularly empathetic. In addition, she's a massive hardass and a huge bitch. A lot of people have read her insistence that she's trying to help Tavros as a cruel joke, but it kind of makes sense that she would go about it the way she does. Tavros has stated that he wants to be a hero, wants to be confident and self-assured, so Vriska, being a freak of nurture as previously stated, obviously would think that tough love and constant challenges are the way to achieve this goal of his. Vriska's treatment of Tavros is still shitty, as he didn't knowingly sign up for this, but it doesn't seem malicious at all, and more like a simple incompatibility of methods. With different framing and a character the audience wasn't already negatively inclined toward, most of Vriska's actions would be read as the standard student and hyper-tough mentor dynamic. She's probably even one of the more helpful client players despite her attitude. She gets Tavros the shoes code so he can get around and seems to generally help him with his quest despite thinking it's boring and pointless. The ableism is a different matter though. It's not okay, of course, and in a different work I would absolutely hold it against her, but that's just the issue. Ableism is a property of Homestuck, not of Vriska. Dave, Karkat, and the narration itself say shit just as bad as Vriska ever has. Let's say there's an audio drama, read entirely by someone with a certain accent, with characters from all over the place. Then the conclusion we draw wouldn't be that any one character actually has that accent, but that it's part of the execution, of the filter through which we are looking into this world. Similarly, I'd argue that Vriska isn't especially ableist, we are just looking at her through the filter of an author who is, or at least was at the time, ableist. Vriska is herself missing an arm and an eye, but because of how twisted up her character is into toxic notions of self-sufficiency, she feels like this is a thing one should just be able to get over the way she and Terezi have. That's an unfair standard, of course, because only Tavros' paraplegia is treated as an actual disability by the text. Vriska doesn't appear to have any lasting issues, and Terezi essentially gained a superpower. The idea that you can just get over a disability through willpower is validated by the text within which the Scourge Sisters exist, so I think her holding that, again deeply flawed, mindset is to be blamed on Hussey, not Vriska. Accusation 7. Causing the creation of Bec Noir. From authorial imposition to meta-narrative imposition, we get to Vriska's first major play at canonical relevance by engineering conditions which lead to Jack's fourth prototyping, and therefore tons of death across multiple sessions of Spurb. Importantly though, this tragedy has already occurred. Vriska is retroactively making herself responsible, but Jack's rampage has already been observed as an integral part of the Alpha timeline. It would have happened anyway, and if it hadn't, everyone would have faded from existence. There's a really crucial distinction to make here, though, when it comes to moral reasoning around fate mechanics. Because the self-justifying nature of the Alpha timeline is a really lazy excuse, I think. It's not inconsistent, but it's forgiving to the point of meaninglessness. Saying Vriska did nothing wrong because the Alpha timeline demanded she do all the things she did, and Vriska to behave differently were wiped from existence, not only misunderstands ethics, but it's also terribly artless. Gamzee killing Nepeter is inscribed into the nature of the Alpha timeline. Everyone would have faded from existence had Gamzee not killed Nepeter. But that doesn't make the action morally justified, because Gamzee did not know this. He didn't kill Nepeter as part of a paradox spatial trolley problem. He just did it, and reality happened to validate him. Vriska creating Bec Noir, or Rose sending John/June back into canonicity to deal with Lord English, are different because not only has the associated suffering already happened and isn't prevented by refusing to cooperate, it also is at these points a known quantity that not complying with canonicity will spell doom. Sometimes the Alpha timeline judges your actions, and sometimes it forces your hand. These two scenarios are not morally equivalent to most people, and though they have the same outcome, they aren't even equivalent to a hardline utilitarian, since one never knows what the Alpha timeline wants. If you have two choices, killing a friend and not killing a friend, then there are 4 possible outcomes. They're dead and everyone else lives, they're dead and everyone fades into nothingness, they and everyone else keep living, and they live for a bit until everyone fades into nothingness. If you don't know how the timeline will judge your actions, then the good choice, not killing your friend, will produce better results more of the time. If the outcome is known, however, you are just choosing between a few people die and everyone dies. This is a trolley problem. Taking on the burden of making that choice and shouldering the guilt isn't just morally neutral, it is unambiguously heroic. The universe doesn't agree though, now does it? When Terezi stabs Vriska, her death is neither that of a martyr, nor an impermanent one resigning itself to cosmic insignificance. The clock strikes just, and that, for a while at least, is that. Who do we think we are to disagree with the universe? Well, there's some debate on the matter, seeing how the clock doesn't come to a stop naturally, but rather is broken by Spade Slick in Vriska's moment of judgment. Hussey, for his part, claims that the scene was meant to be ambiguous, but my infernal loathing for authorial intent is only eclipsed by my unshakable disinterest in any thoughts and opinions of Andrew Hussey specifically, so we aren't going to go down that route. What if just is just in this instance, and the clock's breakage coincidentally coincides? Well, I'd say fuck it, and the comic agrees. Spurb as a game is the primary antagonist of Homestuck. Its rules start out appearing asinine before making their way straight through casually unfair towards outright malicious. It makes you responsible for the end of your world before giving you an unalterable role to agonize over without explaining it. A calling? A challenge? A cruel joke? Spurb asks nothing less than the death of children for a chance at success. A chance that is often zero from the very start by design. If you figure out that it's all hopeless, it forces you to pull the trigger on your own life and that of all your remaining friends, yourself, if you want your species to have another shot. And so, Homestuck is fundamentally a story about cheating, about finding loopholes, breaking rules, and taking leaps of faith to protect your little group from a system that is callously designed to destroy you. If not physically, then emotionally. The ultimate weapon is a tool against English just as much as the oppressive systems of the universe he infests. A power which challenges the crude despotism of the Alpha timeline's all that is must be morality. It's a story about living in a society and a story about revolution. So, when the clock strikes just, its judgment comes from a place of malice, or at the very least apathy. Who does the universe think it is? In the end, when all is set right, Terezi is the one to decide Vriska's fate. The characters for themselves, one more act of cosmic disobedience. For when throughout eternity has anything good come out of Doc Scratch's study? Accusation 8. Killing Tavros. Just imagine, you wrap up a nice day of keeping the timeline from exploding when the guy you wasted hours and hours on training threatens to kill you for just that reason. You like the fact that he's at least showing some initiative finally, so you even let him charge at you with his lance. No mind control, Nothing. You give him a fair shot and then you defend yourself, unarmed, against a guy with a weapon who clearly stated that he intends to kill you. Some people might object that Tavros didn't pose a real threat to Vriska's life and thus should have been spared, but I really don't think anyone should have to put up with assassination attempts just because they are stronger. The trolls are at this point trapped on the meteor, and Vriska does still sleep like anyone else. Being vastly more powerful doesn't always protect you, and I think allowing the existence of someone who wants to kill you and has made an attempt at it before in what is essentially your house is an unreasonable demand. You cannot charge at someone with a lance and expect not to get killed. Did Vriska goad him into it? Kinda. She definitely didn't try to dissuade him, but he clearly already made up his mind, and blaming someone for not trying hard enough not to get killed isn't terrain I'd want to enter. Accusation 9. Fucking over Vriska. Maybe this inclusion is a bit self-indulgent, since I don't see many people hold up Vriska's cruelty towards her pre-retcon self as one of her primary sins, but I want this video to be about understanding Vriska at least in part, and its important interaction for doing that. It's a moment of intense self-loathing, which, though neither healthy nor noble, isn't a crime last time I checked. Despite the enviable cerulean swill and stupid idiot girl comments, a lot of readers have taken Vriska's self-aggrandizement at face value, but if there's any point at which that ought to break down, it's here. This is a woman who hates herself, every aspect of herself, and the only way she can think of her existence as worthwhile in any way is through her actions. It's deeply transactional, every instance of usefulness buying her some purpose, some right to live despite her perceived intrinsic wickedness, mandating that the fire never go out, that there will never be rest or peace or lasting happiness. Not for her. It draws an interesting parallel to Dirk, probably the only character whose neurotic self-hatred is similarly defining and confining. While Dirk lives in constant fear of going overboard, of giving in to his desire to protect and control so much that he would become a monster, Vriska fears just the opposite, that she might slow down, that she might become useless. There are two conversations here which kind of have to be read against each other, and the comic makes it incredibly hard to consciously do that, since they are literally more than 1,000 pages apart. Maybe this is good, because it would be too on the nose otherwise, but that's for everyone to decide for themselves. The first is a chat between Vriska and Mina on page 6748 about Urania's play at Cosmic Relevance. Well, at least superficially. It's very clear that Vriska is criticizing her younger self by proxy. That's the reason why Urania's actions bother her so much to begin with. She describes it as self-indulgent, as glory-hungry and immature to insert oneself into the narrative's unfolding, and she's disgusted by it, seeing her current self-care and quiet observation as the mature option. The comic seems to validate her, showing us a Vriska who is actually happy for once, who's less caustic and seemingly more introspective. This is a woman who would probably be a lot less divisive and would have a lot more friends. Skip ahead to 7785 and this faux character growth we have been lulled into is thoroughly shattered when Vriska Prime shows up and points us once more to what Tavros said shortly before getting himself killed. That there's a difference between being mean and being evil, and a difference between being nice and being good. Any functional adult should know this by heart, and sitting back as people die isn't good. Living it up while sitting on the ultimate weapon to finally put an end to all of this isn't character growth, it's narcissism. It is callous through and through, it's cowardly, it's selfish, it's the opposite of introspective. It's valuing your happiness over the lives of everyone else. Vriska is right to be disgusted by that. Mina is right to leave. While she does deserve happiness as much as everyone else, Spurb is a game that runs on the blood of children, and what makes Vriska heroic is that she will pick self-sacrifice each and every time. Even if she's motivated by self-loathing, she'll do what no one else will. She will fight the war alone, if she must, for everyone, and expecting nothing in return. Parentheses, Vriska hasn't even stopped hating herself. That reads pretty clearly from the earlier convo. She's just chosen different paths to hate. Accusation 10. The dubious ethics of mind control in general. That oh-so-enviable cerulean swill, it does have its perks though, and I'd imagine some people would see mind control as one of those powers you should just never use, unless the alternative is far worse. And I can see why I'm uncomfortable with it too. As people, we quite cling to our notions of free will, but the Scourge Sisters dynamic does something really interesting to throw a wrench into that overly simplistic judgment. Terezi is better at it. All social interaction is manipulation at the end of the day. Every sentence and every gesture deposits thoughts directly into someone's head, whether intentionally or not. It's a speaker's job, and while we all like to think we are too clever to fall for it, there will always be someone who's cleverer. Despite a complete lack of powers, Terezi is better at leading the impressionable to their doom. The only difference with direct mind control is that we can't take refuge in our precious intelligence. It works better on some people than on others, just like manipulation, but being resistant to it doesn't feel earned. And that's kind of a shitty mindset. So I'd rather see Vriska's powers as a tool like any other, one which can be used for evil and for good, like Aqueous' strength, like Solux's mind powers, like Dave's time travel. How does she use it then? Mostly for all the things we have discussed before, so I won't reiterate, but also I find it more interesting to look at the times she doesn't use it. Vriska has the option to make Tavros fall in love with her. She doesn't. Vriska has the option to make Tavros kill her when she's lying on her quest bed, but she doesn't. She tries to convince him, but she doesn't make him do it, instead resigning herself to slowly and painfully bleed to death. These are the actions of a person who has quite a bit of respect for the agency of others, I'd say, unless there's no other option. Her powers seem to be in responsible hands. Conclusion. In the end, Vriska is responsible for the trolls winning their session, is one of the only people to actually explain Spurb to the beta kids, and finds as well as uses the ultimate weapon against English. In her off time, she commissions Aradia a new body, gets Gamzee under control, and fixes Rose's alcohol problem. To me, it's not surprising that Aradia and Solux seem to forgive her. She may be a bitch, and she may not think things through all of the time, but she's the only person dedicated and stalwart enough to save the universe, and when the final reward finally comes into sight, she doesn't even take it. From adversity, through adversity, into the unknown. You can see it now. You're looking at a survivor. You're looking at someone who did nothing wrong. Or at least someone who deserves way more empathy than the fucking hell sludge that is Riskos tends to grant her. Holy shit. Yes, I'm aware I just did the thing where I had to write out a whole essay to justify defending Vriska. Do I regret it? Not a bit. I'm Oro. You can find my own pretentiously worded fictions on ouroborista.neocities.org. I'd appreciate a visit, and if you'd like to chat with me about this, those, or anything else really, why don't you leave a comment or message me on Discord or Twitter? Don't be a douche, and that's it from me. Bye.